All right, the Empire of Ghana. Around the 5th century. Now, when I say 5th century, we got to remember this, that 5th century, that means the 400s. Now, you might be thinking that doesn't make sense, but the 5th century is the 400s. Because you got to remember the years 0 to 99. Oh yeah, and all of this is AD. All of this is AD, after death. So the years 0 to 99, that's the 1st century. If that's the 1st century, that means the 100s are the 2nd century. The 400s would be the 5th century. We are living in the 21st century. So just a quick reminder of that. So in the 5th century, thanks to the availability of the camel, Berber-speaking people began crossing the Sahara Desert. Now when I say Berber-speaking people, I'm referring to the people in North Africa. These are our North African Muslims. There's a Berber Empire in North Africa. Because they have the camel, they're able to trade with West Africa because they can cross the Sahara Desert. It works better than horses, other animals. They can make this big trip. And the only reason why they're going to make this big trip, there has to be something really worthwhile on the other end. Otherwise, you're not traveling through the desert. So, also, as a reminder, this is the same time period as the Silk Road. So in Asia, over the large deserts of Asia, people are traveling back and forth on camels. We see the Silk Road starting around the year 600, around the same time period. So we see people are trading all over the world. So for our Muslims who are like in the Middle East, in the Arabia region, life is pretty good for them. They can trade with people in China. And now they also begin trading with people in West Africa. So, they're crossing the desert, they're trading. Were camels mentioned in your reading?
Yes.
Was this mentioned that this is how the trade starts? And I just mentioned it now. What do you know?
That's important.
It's important. The part about camels having the ability to trade is important because it was in the book and the lecture. I'm not going to do that every time, but that's a reminder. You might want to put a star by that right now in your lecture notes. When professors say it and you read it, it's important. All right. So from the 8th century on, and again, that's the 700s. So from the 8th century on, gold was sought from western and central Sudan. So this region right here. Gold is sought in West Africa and West and Central Sudan. And this begins what's known as the Trans-Saharan trade. The Trans-Saharan trade. Because people who are outside of Africa find gold to be very valuable. People in the Middle East find gold valuable, especially in the Mediterranean region, or North Africa. These Muslim kingdoms find gold to be very valuable. They want it. People in Arabia find it valuable, other areas of the world. So there's a demand for gold. Once there's a demand for something, you will find people who want to sell it and make money off it. Go ahead, I'm not going to say her name because we're on the lecture. But
I'm going to say, what is that? Like, what is that?
to go after. Good question. All right, so this leads to the rise of the Soninke Empire. This leads to the rise of the Soninke Empire. Now, Ghana, Soninke, we're going to use them as the same thing. But the empire is actually called the Soninke Empire. Ghana was the name for the king. They called the king the Ghana. This is actually really similar to in South America, the Incas. The people aren't called Incas, they're called Quechua. The leader, the king, was called the Inca. What happens sometimes, the king's called Ghana, that must be the Ghana Empire, and they start calling it that. So what happens in West Africa is the Soninke people, they were kind of like a federation. They were a bunch of villages. They had different family clans that were together. And they lived on the gold mines. They lived on and near the gold mines. So basically they're forming their villages. They're a farming people, starting their agriculture, their cities, just like we see everywhere in the world. And as they formed their villages, their farming, this is before the gold was discovered, they would be attacked by nomadic people every once in a while. This is very similar to Samaria, very similar to Egypt, China. So what do? You start defending yourself. You start building walls. So they start defending themselves, building walls, having their villages, kind of like a loose confederation, like not an empire yet. But then gold is discovered. And people from the outside will bring valuables to them in trade. What happens once you begin trading? What do you get when you start trading? Yes? Cultural diffusion will come in. We'll talk about that Islam in a little bit. Cultural diffusion will come in, but also the country that trades the most also tends to be the strongest and richest, because they have materials and goods that no one else has. You might have weapons that no one else has. They get copper, a really useful metal for cooking. They get different ideas. Books start coming in, ideas. So if you trade more, you tend to advance more. That's a rule of history. And again, I'd say the country that trades the most and has people coming in and out of its country will always be the richest. Because one kingdom can't come with all the good ideas that many kingdoms can. All right, so their valuable is gold. They have gold, and the Berber traders want to trade for it. Groups like the Almoravids want to trade for it. These Muslim groups that are North African Arabia, they want the gold. So the main thing they trade for gold from the reading was salt. Now, many of you are probably thinking, wow, I wish I could go back in time, fill my backpack full of all the salt I can, and go trade with them, because I could bring that back and I could go pay for my college, a house, a car, and everything. Why was salt so valuable in the past? It's not worth much at all right now. Go ahead.
What is it as a preservative?
It was a preservative. There weren't many preservatives back then. So if you had meat and you had to keep it fresh, or you had to keep it because you wanted to eat it later, you wanted to store it, could you do that without salt? No refrigerators, no electricity. It's incredibly valuable for preserving food. It's also a mineral rock. They built houses out of it in West Africa. Yeah, that much. A lot of salt, but you could do it. Go ahead.
Can't you use it to clean things too?
Yes, you can. Also, were there a lot of spices back then in food? No, so it had a lot of flavor to food too, so it became like a luxury item too. Luxury items become valuable. So again, no refrigeration. You can preserve meat. If you want to think of what's preserved meat look like, just think of like beef jerky. How long can you keep beef jerky in a store shelf for? Forever. I mean, have you ever seen like beef jerky with mold on it? It doesn't go bad. It's got preservatives in it. If you really want to take this to the next step, think potato chips. The potato chips, I mean, yeah, they might taste stale, but do they ever go bad? McDonald's French fries, I could pour some on the table, I can come back a year later. There's still not going to be any mold on those things. That's how many preservatives there are in those things. They're going to look still brand new. Those aren't good preservatives, by the way. That's why McDonald's French fries are like the worst thing you can eat. All right, let's keep going. Sorry, I know they taste good too. That's the bad part. They taste really good, but they're really bad for you. All right, so preservatives. That's why salt is incredibly valuable. So the Empire of Ghana forms from trade. They formed from trade. They start as an empire around the year 800. So the people were always there. It's not like these Ghana people suddenly show up on the earth. What happens is the Soninke people start taking more and more land, and people become part of their empire. And they get a monopoly on the gold trade. Basically, if there's a gold mine, they take it over and they expand their empire. Why would it be really important for them to control all the gold trade? What can they do if they control all the mines? Go ahead.
Limit selling them?
Yeah, no one else can sell for cheaper. They can charge whatever price they want if they control it all. They're the only place you can go. So the people of Ghana, what they do is they have all the gold mines, all control of it. So when the North African Muslim traders come in, when the Arabian Muslim traders come in, they can trade, they get the salt, and they get other valuables, and it leads them to become stronger and stronger. And they have a kingdom that lasts almost 300 years. One other item that is, also, let me go to, the capital is called Kumbe Salah. Kumbe Salah becomes the capital. It's the focus of trade. And they also get rich because when you have to come into Kumbai Salat to trade, that's the main trade center, they charge taxes on people. And they collect those taxes, which makes the king of Ghana even richer. Why does the king of Ghana have so much gold? They control it all, they have monopoly, they charge taxes. That's why when we did this reading yesterday, we see why is the king so rich? They control the gold trade. By the way, this is the primary source. This has just been translated from Arabic. This is the primary source of someone who was there. That's how we know history is true or not. We look at the primary sources. We'll do that more when we look at the life of a former slave, Alado Equiano, and Bartolomé de las Casas on what was it really like when the Europeans came to Africa and the Americas. Well, we have the evidence. We can just read it. So, let's keep going here. One other item that was traded, this is a controversial item, but it did happen in West Africa, was slaves. There was a slave trade. And there was a slave trade 500 years, 1,000 years before the Europeans were ever even in Africa. So how did slavery work? It was very similar to the slavery in the Roman Empire. You read about this in the Roman Empire, just in the paper not too long ago. Slavery existed in the Roman Empire. How did it happen? Well, it normally happened when a people were conquered. Like when Ghana was expanding its empire, if they defeated a people and conquered them, they could become slaves. Like maybe they weren't killed, maybe they weren't taken prisoner, they could become slaves in the empire. Now, was it based upon they looked like this? Or anything, like this is their race? No. It was basically they were conquered, they became slaves. Did it mean that their kids would become slaves? No. It wasn't the same thing that happened in America. It existed. But to say, some people make an argument, and it's a horrible, horrible argument that, slavery exists in Africa anyway, it wasn't the same thing that happened in America. It wasn't that we're going to take all this group of people because they look like this and make their kids slaves and their kids slaves and their kids slaves. This was the exact kind of slavery that was going on in Rome. So in history at this time, most places in the world had some form of slavery. And it's not just an African thing. This was everywhere. It was in Rome. We already read about it. It was in parts of Asia. It was pretty much slavery was everywhere. Also, if you became in debt, if you owed money, you could become a slave. If you committed a crime, your family clan could say, well, we have to settle this. You committed the crime. Okay, you're going to become their slave. That could happen. Now, as the Muslim traders come in and the Arabs come in, they start buying these slaves, and we see the formation of a slave trade, of people being sold. So slave trade wasn't first in Europe, it was first in North Africa and Arabia. In fact, in some parts of Africa, slavery, like the system I'm talking about, still exists today in some parts. Henry Louis Gates in his video actually met some people who were slaves in West Africa to other people. And it's not new, it's always existed. Now, does this mean it happens everywhere in Africa? No, it's a few places, a few isolated places. It still happens today. And I'd say there's slavery in America. I think there is still. I would call a woman who is brought to America and gets involved in sex trafficking, I would call her a slave. Most of them do not have a choice. So, I think that is all we got. We'll talk about how Ghana falls on the Islamic influence next. So why don't we do a compare and case, and I will stop my